Welcome and thanks for watching. The starting point for this video assumes that you've got RealWorks downloaded, installed and licensed, and there's a link in the description of this video for some of that, and contact your local Trimble dealer if you need a trial or a purchased license. The content we're going to cover today runs with the functionality from RealWorks Starter Edition, which is the base paid license. So the default installation for RealWorks will be on your C drive. We just always want to make sure RealWorks is going to require a decent amount of free space, something like 50 gigabytes minimum, but the more you can give it, the better, particularly as you get larger scan jobs. We would like to try and work off a C drive or some sort of SSD. If you've got a fast external, that's not too bad, but just being careful with older hard disk drives and things like that, you can notice some speed issues, and for big and complex jobs, we might be more likely to get a crash. Okay, first thing we want to do after installing or doing an update as well is to come in and check our preferences. There's a number of useful settings here. If you're brand new to the software, you might come into navigation and change the buttonology to what you're used to in other softwares. But particularly I want to highlight this HD display section. Your automatic might accurately detect your computer, but depending on your build it might not. So you want to ensure that this is appropriate for the quality of your computer. If you don't know what that is, start system information, show us our physical RAM, and in components and display, show us our graphics card. And I don't know how to determine exactly how many gigabytes that's got, so I use Google, which tells me mine's a 2 gigabyte card. Great, so in advance we'll tell it what we have. The graphics card is exactly as per the model. For the RAM, we enter the full value of our RAM in, and we'll hit enter, and we'll notice that it halved it, and that's explained down here. That's just how RealWorks operates. So that's important to do the first time we install or update the software. And we can hit go, and it'll ask you to restart. Okay, if we've got a laptop or some sort of computer that's likely to have an integrated graphics card and a proper graphics card, let's say, we're going to come to the control panel for that graphics card, in this case NVIDIA, and we're either going to force everything onto the high performance card, or we can individually tell it that we want that program to use the high performance card. At that point we're pretty much ready to go. There's a couple of options. I've switched into dark theme, whatever you'd like to do. So we'll take some data. In this example I'm working with some Trimble X series scanner data and the TDX format, so it's been registered in the field already. If you're using a different type of data, then in the home section and import, we've got some other options depending on your format, and you may or may not require additional steps about registration and things like that. In this case, we'll drag and drop into the left-hand side somewhere, and we're always prompted to create a project name somewhere on your C drive, whichever drive you're using. Here we go. So one of the concepts of RealWorks is that it's built for hundreds or up to 1,000 or more scans. So it really requires us to tell it how much of the raw data we want it to use at the moment. It may well not be practical to use 1,000 scans at full resolution. So we've got a number of options. Generate a preview scan will give us 1,000,000 points per scan, and it's often a pretty good starting point. Sampling by step. Step 1 means every point in each scan. Step 2 would mean for each scan, every second point. So that depends on your density settings and so forth. Spatial sampling, reasonably self-explanatory. And we've got options to filter by range and intensity. We generally would stand clear of that unless we already know really what we're wanting. And we've got an option to export the panoramas if we've had the imagery on. My dataset doesn't have them turned on in the field, so I'm not going to bother. I'm going to generate a preview scan because this is nice and quick, and we'll hit start. So I like to think of RealWorks as a bell curve. In the first half of the software, we're adding more data. We're building up to the total maximum amount of data. So that might be this one job, that might be combining different jobs from different sources, suppliers, last year's, this year's, whatever it might be, scan, drone, different sources, pointing it at those data sources and determining how much of those to bring in. So depending on how many scans we've got, this might be 2 minutes, this might be 2 hours, 2 days if we've got 1,000 scans. So we'll let that run and come back when it's finished. That's now finished. And we've loaded some data. So before we look at the data itself, just to explain briefly the layout of the screen, I suppose. Standard sort of tabs arrangement and buttons below that. Naming is reasonably useful. If we hover over something in RealWorks, we'll get a tooltip. And there's a help function if we want a bit more information on something. We've got this upper left window, which you'd call the data tree, I guess. And then the bottom left is pretty much your equivalent of a Windows Explorer type view. In this case, I brought in a set of registered scans, and that's named in a folder group, essentially. And I've got these light bulb icons that tell me what's displayed. So if I skip ahead a little bit and swap to a 3D view, we can see that I've got 36 scans in this instance. Currently everything's displayed. In this bottom left view, we can use Shift Select or Control Select to just work with the particular scans that we want to have. So in this case here, I might turn some of the later scans in this wider area of the warehouse off. Untick that there. Alternatively, I can right click and display or just view only. This is a useful one rather than turning off 29 other scans. Or I can turn everything off and everything on at the project level. So that's pretty handy. If we need to, we can organize our own data into folders. If we had 2 separate jobs, or we were joining this with other data sources, we're going to expect to see other folder groups. But at the moment, we've got 36 scans which are registered. The first thing we want to do is talk through the view interface a little bit. So we've got the full terminology up here, I suppose you'd say, and basically a miniature copy of most of the frequent buttons down the side here. So for example, turning our station icons on and off, changing from currently color-coded intensity to proper color if you'd taken photos, grayscale, whatever it is that you prefer. I know on my gray background, this white view is quite useful when we've combined it, particularly with a shading option. Otherwise, it's a bit tough. But personal preference or based on what process you're doing at the time. We started in that station view before. So currently it's just put me down into station 1. And similarly, I can shortcut through here by right-clicking rather than clicking along 35 times until I'm where I want to be looking. Walkthrough allows us to use the arrow keys, but I'm not a big fan. So our 3D view and our station view is probably where we're commonly spending time. Different view options again. Zoom extents if we get lost is a useful one. Top, down, left, right, etc. Top view is a fairly useful one when we're trying to make some selections later. Options for point size. Filters, which I'd suggest not to use if you're new to the software. And rendering, as we touched on very briefly before. So I skip to the view settings. In the Home tab, measure, lots of useful basic tools. Standard measurement, vertical only measurement, angle measurement, point measurement, horizontal measurement. Some really nice tools in there for understanding our data and starting to solve some simple questions. Okay, when I did an import here, I did a preview extraction, and we can see in a lot of this area I don't have very high density of scans. Now on my concrete car park that's not a problem, but in my core building I might want higher density depending on what I'm going to do in this job. One of the most efficient ways I've found is to use limit box extraction, and that way we can just define the particular area where we need either all the data or more of the data. And I can hit extract. So that's sampling by step 1, which means everything. And we'll let that crunch down in the bottom left. Probably only about a minute. That's finished now. And if we're not quite sure, the way we can check what we've done there is to go into an individual scan station, and we can see that there's the original preview that I created when I first imported it, and then there's sample by step 1. And if I expand this so you can see. We've got 1 million versus 26 million points from that scan position. So a bit of a difference. Excellent. Now, really important that I should have mentioned, RealWorks is very heavy on having something selected before you can do anything. So you'll find as we progress through the software, a lot of buttons are grayed out until we have something selected. As soon as I select one or multiples or a whole folder or the whole project, it'll enable me to actually do some of the processes. So that's pretty critical. Whatever you select is what it will work on. So if you only want to work on a portion of your data, in this case I have this interior office example rather than the whole of the warehouse, then I'd make sure to work out which of those scans I'm interested in, and I could put those in their own group. This is not the correct list, but we can pretend that we want to call this office. And that'll help me to quickly view it or not view it, particularly to make sure if I'm doing a particular operation, I'm just doing it on what's selected. Despite the fact that other things are showing on the screen, my selection is the key. One of the nice tools in RealWorks is we can hit Control-Z or the undo arrow. So I'm just going to get rid of that pretend office folder that I don't need. Beautiful. Like any software, we want to make sure to save every now and then. This is not an automatic save program. So if we've done a decent bit of work, make sure we hit save. We'd always suggest having a raw separate copy of this data. So we might zip that raw data out at the start, and that way if something goes really strange with our computer, we've got that there. If we're doing a very large RealWorks project, we'll probably copy the project a day in or whatever it might be to make sure that we minimize any risks from things going wrong. Okay, so we've got these scans in and we've extracted from the relevant scans all the detail that we want to get. What are we going to do next? Okay, again, nothing selectable until we select some files to work on. We may have done this in the field, we may not have. Really critical that at some point in the process we've checked our registration. So there's a particular visual check tool here, which is just the same as taking a slice from the limit box tool that I started with before. So when I'm using that one, it's the same tool out of whichever window. We've got this little 4 arrows. It's just waiting for me to center it somewhere. And then I can adjust, I can rotate, I can zoom, I can drag in and out, all sorts of things until I'm just interested in the bit that I want to see right now. And if I want to, I can store that. If I know I'm going to come back to this office lots of times, which I probably will, I might be a little bit less lazy, do this properly. There we go. I'm going to call this office. That's the save button, and this is the list. We can then give it a name. Okay. And that list exists in the limit box window section here. And that off for now. Just being careful, if we've got multiple monitors, sometimes we can have these little tools pop up somewhere else on our screen. So we'll have to go looking for those and bring it back. Great. But registration visual checks, what I wanted to show. Okay, it's automatically set us to color by station, which is useful. And I'm going to take a horizontal slice. And this is a 2-level building, so I'm just going to pick the top level to begin with. And I'm probably going to want to swap to a top view. And then, as I would say, fatten up the points a little bit. Thickness I prefer a lot less. A lot of walls aren't built perfectly vertical, and we start to see some thickness and some funny stuff going on. So, depending on our scanner and our settings we used in the field, 50mm might be perfectly sufficient. When I selected that height, I've just clicked somewhere. We might want to specify that to be above doorways, above furniture. So we're going to have a simpler scan to look at. But the critical thing, whether we do it in field or do it in RealWorks, at some point it must be done, is to have done a visual check on the registration and look for anything that's potentially out of place. So in some of these rooms we've got some doors open and closed, but I can't see at the moment any scans completely sitting in the wrong spot. So here I've got orange or brown, red and green all lined up, and blue and so forth. And if one of those colors was sitting out completely on its own, I'd be looking at that color and saying, right, if I hover over that, that's station 21, that's blue. Can I see blue sitting out of place somewhere else, which it usually will be. All right, and if there is a problem, then we need to go and do some work on that. But I'm happy with what we've got here, so that's great. So at this point, we're pretty much through the first half, if you will, of the software. Okay, we've got an imaging and a media tab, but we probably don't use those very frequently. If we've got survey coordinates or a plan origin or something like that, then we've got the option to come in and georeference those, so we can bring a CSV of control points in and match those up. And there are a few other ways to do that. Probably not the point for this video here. So we may not have noticed, but we've been in this, I call it a phase, registration phase of the software, as opposed to the registration menu. We've been in that first half of the bell curve. We've been building up and adding and checking until we've got the most of the data at high quality, if you will. And then we're going to swap to production. Okay. Excellent. Now we've got a couple of extra things here because I showed you a few things on the go. We'll just get rid of those to keep it simple as you would see it. So we'll have Project Cloud and we'll turn that on. Same light bulb tool we used before, light bulb. So we don't see 36 or whatever scans anymore. We just see one finished clump. And that's because this registration phase assumed that we got everything correct. Right? And we're now just ready to treat this as the scan of this place. See? Excellent. So depending on your license, you're going to have different tabs, particularly in this point. But we're on that other half of the bell curve. We're actually most likely to be trimming our data down, I suppose. So for this video, we've set the minimum deliverable is probably to do that registration check that we did before, and then to clean up and trim this data a little bit and export it. So in this example here, I don't want this stuff across the road or through the gaps between the buildings. I obviously haven't scanned that properly. I'm just interested in this particular piece of the property, or I'm just interested in this office space within the warehouse. So that's probably the example we'll pick here, is we'll say just that office piece that I showed you before. And if I wanted to, I can go in and use that limit box. I've started a little bit of the process, but we'll do it from scratch here. Okay. Segmentation. So a number of tools in RealWorks live in lots of places. Okay, if the name and the icon's the same, the tool's the same. So I've selected, and segmentation, which is the word in RealWorks for chopping, essentially. So I'll do a bit of a rough one to begin with. Make sure I get my spacing right. I've got different shapes if I need. I'm going to keep what's inside that selection. Great. And a bit rough and ready to begin with. And then I'll get a little bit more precise as I go. And if we like, we can use these top, left, right default, depending on how our data was oriented in the field. And we keep going until we're happy with what we've got and we've done a good, clean job. If we need to, we can combine that with the limit box tool. So I'm going to create this and then I'll show you that. So create, and it's not deleting anything, it's splitting what we've just selected out from that total project cloud and just gives it a random name, object 345, etc. And it's going to change our view for us and put that on and turn the project cloud off. But in that segmentation tool, if I need to, I can use a limit box, and I've got the option to just give you an example you can see. Got the option to select only from within that limit box. So if I've got a limit box active, this box selection option comes on. Okay. And that will allow me to select something in this space without sending that rectangle all the way back into infinity and selecting the whole warehouse behind it. It's just going to operate within this rectangular prism I've created. Very useful for cleaning data up as well. If we wanted to get rid of some of the furniture or the cars out the front, for example, if we wanted to get rid of these cars in the car park, we might use that limit box tool in combination with the segmentation tool, so that when we select it, we're not cutting a hole in the car park as well. We can adjust the bottom elevation of that limit box so that we're only going to select the cars and vehicles above it and get rid of them. So back to the bit that we do want, in this case the office, we might need to segment a couple of times. We might decide to split this into ground level and level 1, whatever it might be. And we might end up with object 3, object 4, object 5. Very strongly recommend as soon as we've got more than a couple that we get in here and name this. Otherwise we will get completely lost. So I've just slow double clicked on there and entered a new name for it. But if we like what we've got here, great. If we need to, we can do some size management. So that's 700 million points. That may or may not be too much depending on where you're going and what you're doing with this next. Reasonably common to come in and reduce that data size somewhat. Now obviously that's a trade-off. If we brought everything in at the start knowing that we're going to want to keep everything, great. But we can either reduce it to a particular number of points, or we can do a spatial sampling and some other option as well, again depending on your license. I'm going to hit no. I'm happy to keep what I've got. So in our example here, I'm pretty much ready. I've got a point cloud, I've imported it, I've had a bit of a look so I understand it, I've done a registration visual check, I've brought it across to production phase, I've trimmed it down a little bit, and I'm ready to export it. So I've selected it, export selection, and into the particular format that we want to have. So we just get a total list of output options that RealWorks has, so we need to ensure that we select something that's appropriate for a point cloud. So that's going to be principally your E57s, your LAS, your TDX in Trimble World, your RCPs, and one or two others. So open source format, we might hit an E57, give that a name, bang. And depending on the format, it's going to ask us for different options. I don't have any color on, so no point leaving that there. 30 scans, that export might take a couple of minutes.